I just watched a movie that I feel like is almost specifically and exactly made for someone like me. I'm in awe. Let's talk about The Fall Guy. What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here. And as I do with all my movie reviews, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about The Fall Guy, who made it, what it's about, all that good stuff. Then I'm going to go into the things I did and did not like about the movie, the pros and cons. And finally, I'll let you know who I think The Fall Guy is for, if anyone. If that kind of thing sounds cool to you and you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies coming out in theaters and at home on streaming, make sure you subscribe. In The Fall Guy, a down and out stuntman must find the missing star of his ex-girlfriend's feature film. The Fall Guy is an action comedy movie based loosely on the 80s TV series of the same name. It's written by Drew Pearce, who also wrote on Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, Fast and Furious Hobbs and Shaw, and Iron Man 3, which I think is a little underrated. And the movie's directed by David Take My Money Leitch, who of course also worked on John Wick, Deadpool 2, Bullet Train, which I had a lot of fun with, and he's produced a number of other movies, including I think Nobody and that recent Santa Claus movie, Violent Night. The movie's in theaters this weekend and is rated PG-13 for a whole lot of violence and action, as well as some drug use and I think a little bit of language. And it comes in at I think just over 2 hours long. The movie stars Ryan Gosling as the Fall Guy. Emily Blunt is his girlfriend and the director of the movie that the movie is based on, or rather that the movie is being made within the movie. It's complicated. You've also got Aaron Taylor Johnson, who plays the star of the movie within the movie who goes missing. Hannah Waddingham, whose name I wasn't familiar with, but I've definitely seen her before, I think in Game of Thrones and also in Ted Lasso. She's the big producer on the movie. And then Stephanie Sue and Winston Duke make an appearance. I think Winston Duke has a little more to do in the movie, and I actually really enjoyed his character. Stephanie Sue's fine as well, but she just doesn't have as much to do. So before we get into the pros and cons, let me let you know my expectations going into the movie so that way you kind of have an idea as to where I'm coming from. Now, for me, I have enjoyed, I think, every David Leitch movie so far. Action, comedy is my jam. So as soon as I heard about this movie being made, I was 100% on board. I was sold. I was ready to go, and I was praying that they didn't let me down. As far as the cast is concerned, Ryan Gosling has really grown on me over the years. At first, back in the day, I wasn't a real big fan of his at all, but definitely within the past few years, I've come to enjoy what he does. I feel like he's found a new footing and a new way of being in his movies, especially with these comedies, and it's really working for me. Also, Emily Blunt, I've loved forever since 2006 in The Devil Wears Prada. And then, later on in that movie with Tom Cruise, it's got like a million different names. All You Need Is Kill, Live, Die, Repeat, or I think Edge of Tomorrow is what it went as when it was in theaters. I mean, she's fantastic. I love her in everything she does. Needless to say, my hopes were super high going into this movie. But did it live up to my expectations? Well, let's go ahead and start with the pros. Now, right off the bat, The Fall Guy is a love letter to stunt performers everywhere over the years. It has so many nods to different movies and different famous stunts that people have performed. And for me personally, I grew up loving things like the Jackie Chan movies. Rush Hour is one of my favorite movies of all time. I can probably quote that movie from front to back. And so not only does it feel like a love letter to the stunt community, but also it feels like a love letter to people that love stunt-filled movies, people who grew up on action flicks, and especially action comedy, right? I mentioned Rush Hour, but there's a specific subgenre within action that this really hits right on the head. And I also appreciate that with all of those nods to these classic action movies, they touch on something that I think is pretty important, and they mention it in the movie, and it's been talked about a little bit here and there, and that is the fact that stunts and stunt performances aren't really recognized on a grand scale when it comes to major award ceremonies like the Oscars, the Academy Awards. And they briefly mention it in the movie, but I appreciate the fact that they're kind of putting that out there to be like, hey, these people are putting their lives on the lines and have been for decades and have done so much to make these movies even better that they deserve a bit of recognition. So I admire that out of David Leitch and what he's trying to do there. Now, being that this movie is based on what it's based on, as you can imagine, the stunts in this movie are absolutely insane. I'm not even joking. It's some of the best stunt work that I've seen in a while. And there have been some really great stunt heavy movies that have come out in the past few years, whether it's the John Wick movies or the Extraction movies with Chris Hemsworth. There's a lot of really good stunt heavy movies that are coming out recently. But this, man, this just takes it to an entirely different level. It really feels like they did not hold back in any way. They went full balls to the wall with the stunts. And I mean, I left completely satisfied with it in that regard. But don't get me wrong, the movie is not just a stunts extravaganza, right? There is a lot more to it than that. Another thing that really stood out to me, of course, is the comedy. I feel like David Leitch has such a specific way of delivering comedy in his movies. And it's kind of hard to pin down and explain, but it's almost this sarcastic and not quite fourth wall breaking comedy, but rather the movie delivers itself, the dialogue delivers itself in a way that you know that they know that they're in a movie without them explicitly saying it. And so I really like that kind of self-referential, fourth wall breaking humor that they use in really a lot of David Leitch's movies. And I also love that all of the action and the comedy in this, or at least a lot of it, is very unique. It's, you know, certain things that we've seen time and time again. You know, you're jumping a car over a ravine. You know, there's different fights and things that we've seen in other movies. But there's also a whole lot of really original stunts and really original jokes that we get in this movie. You know, we're coming up on the summer movie season, and this really feels like the perfect way to kick that off with kind of just this extreme and wonderful example of escapism. And of course, I don't want to spoil anything at all in the movie, but there are a number of scenes that, man, I can't tell you, after leaving this, they were just stuck in my head as some of the most entertaining things that I've seen in a while. You know, I got to see this with a group of critics, but also a bunch of fans that were in the audience as well. And they straight up applauded after the movie. They were cracking up laughing. We all were cracking up laughing the entire time. It's just a good time. And not only with the action and the comedy, but I really feel like a big part of this movie that I enjoyed is kind of the romance element, right? With Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt and their characters, and kind of the will they, won't they of the whole story. And of course, you wanting to see them get together in the end, but having all of these things kind of get in the way of that. You know, a big part of what I enjoyed about this movie was that human element. You know, it's not just a big explosion-filled, action-packed, slapstick movie. There's also a lot of heart to it as well. And in fact, some people might think that that's the best part of the movie. You know, Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt have great chemistry together. And of course, you know, you don't really know what it's like behind the scenes, but it feels like they just really got along. And that is incredibly important when you're watching a movie, because you want to be able to connect with those characters in that way. And you totally do. Man, really, I could just tell you scene by scene everything that I loved about this movie, but we would be here all day. But needless to say, this is absolutely worth seeing in theaters. But even with all that, no movie is perfect. So let's get into the things that I didn't quite like about The Fall Guy. But before we do, I want to let you know that this video is sponsored by you. That's right. I'm just a small independent channel here without any big corporate sponsors or anything like that. So just by watching this video, you're really helping me out. If you want to be super dope and show your support in the easiest possible way, do me a solid and like the video, and maybe drop a comment down below. Let me know, what are some of your favorite action comedy movies of all time? For me, it's definitely Rush Hour. That is absolutely at the top of the list. But let me know some of yours. You can also now join as a channel member if you want to help support me financially, or just subscribe for free if you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies coming out. So either way, whatever you do, I appreciate it. All right, on to the cons. And this is going to be a little difficult because, you know, I left this movie thinking, you know, hot damn, this movie is perfect, but it's not, and no movie is perfect. And so when I think about why people might not like it as much as I do, I have a couple of reasons. One is, yes, this movie is full of comedy and action and ridiculousness. And so if you are kind of the type of person that is into the more serious cinematic experience, this is not that. Also, as David Leitch tends to do, the movie is just a little bit too long. I'm talking 10, 15 minutes. You know, there's a point in the movie where it feels like it's wrapping up and it's coming to its conclusion, and then it continues to come to its conclusion and continues and continues and then it finally ends. And I think that there's maybe 10 to 15 minutes that they could have shaved off there to make the movie just flow a little bit better. Now, granted, I will say with something like Bullet Train, which is another David Leitch movie that I loved, that went on, I think, way too long. There was way too much tacked on at the end of that movie. This is much, much less. So it's not nearly as egregious as Bullet Train was when it comes to that. But there is still that tendency that I feel like David Leitch has to not quite know how to bring the plane in for a landing. But that's really it. That's the only real negative I can think of for this movie. So, okay, who do I think The Fall Guy is for? Well, obviously, as I've mentioned already, if you're like me, if you grew up loving action movies and comedies, if you just want to get out to the theater and have a great time watching an awesome display of stunts and explosions and some genuinely hilarious moments with some really likable characters, then yeah, this is for you. But if that's not your bag, if that's not the kind of movie that you're into, if you're into more of the slow, contemplative, independent, really thoughtful and introspective movies, and you just don't like these kind of films, then yeah, well, you already know what to do. But for me, I cannot recommend The Fall Guy enough. I think this is an amazing way to kick off the summer season of movies. So if you have the opportunity, absolutely get out to your theater, watch The Fall Guy, and just have a good time. So yeah, if The Fall Guy sounds interesting to you, check it out in theaters this weekend. If you've seen it already, let me know what you think in the comments below. And of course, if you want to keep up to speed on all the new big movies that are coming out in theaters and on streaming, make sure you subscribe. All right, my dude, I'll catch you in the next one. Be good.